You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Probably the most celebrated, famous phrase from Augustine's writings, from his homilies, his sermons, commentaries, recognizable in many parts of the world in many different languages, that we are called to recognize God in ourselves and ourselves in God, and that we are restless and will always be restless until our journey takes us to be with God entirely forever. So we're on our journey. Hopefully you have acquired a copy of the Book of the Confessions and are able to follow along and make this journey your journey. Just as Augustine is saying in this very, very first paragraph of the first book, in the first chapter of this 13 books of the Confessions, that his heart is restless. I hope you can identify yourself that we are restless. We're on our way, that we're not entirely satisfied, that recognize that there's something more for us. Augustine is writing in the Confessions so that others can hear, so that others can share his experience, his testimony, his confession of praise of God, what God is capable of doing in him, and is doing in him, and is doing in you, in me, in us. What God is capable of wants us to realize, this confession of praise, a confession of faith, that we believe that this God is working in us, working through us. It's not just a happening, not just a circumstance, but we are able to recognize God also in our weakness and our sinfulness and our lack of understanding and response to God's love and mercy in our lives. So there's the challenge to discover God and learn more about who God is, and therefore learn more about who you and I are, who we are before God. So Augustine begins this writing at about 40 years of age, in the year 397, in the northern part of Africa, land where he was born and where he will serve as a Christian, a religious, a bishop for the rest of his life until the year 430, when he is called back to the Father. And this God to whom he and you and all of us will be called back to is the God who Augustine is discovering, talking to, and talking with in front of others, so that we can know more about who this God is. And as I begin this first chapter of the first book of Augustine's Confessions, and knowing that he is searching for God, I can't help but encourage you to search for God as you go along through this. I encourage you to read parts of this chapter as you discover Augustine spontaneously bursting into prayer, or some particular phrase which speaks to you. Spend some time with that. Maybe share that thought, share that reflection with somebody else. Share the search with somebody else. For Augustine, this was a communal search. It wasn't a lonely and isolated, an individual search. It was a personal search. We are more persons the more we relate. This is the God whom Augustine discovered, the God revealed to us by Jesus Christ, the God in whom we believe, and I hope you have experienced in your life. Contemporary Pope Francis has spoken to us 5 years ago when he published his encyclical on the care of our common home, Laudato Si. The very final paragraphs of that document, just short and very interesting to read of it by itself, but today because it speaks to us of the God that Augustine knew, the God who is Trinity, the God who is community, the God who is three persons, relationships. So in that document on care of our common home, Francis identifies this, God as the Father, the ultimate source of everything, the loving and self-communicating foundation of all that exists. Certainly, that is Augustine's experience of God, which was revealed to him through his parents, through revelation, his understanding of Jesus, the scriptures, through the Christian community of his time. So God is the Father, but also Francis reminds us the Son, the reflection of the Father, through whom all things were created, who united himself to this earth when he was formed in the womb of Mary. So this is Jesus revealed to us and understood by Augustine, and with whom he had developed a personal relationship, which I hope you and all of us can develop a personal relationship. So God is Father, God is Son, and obviously God is Spirit. The Spirit, infinite bond of love, is intimately present at the very heart of the universe, inspiring and bringing new pathways. So for Augustine, faith was not a matter of learning doctrine, of putting into practice something that he learned, but rather an experience of a personal encounter with a loving triune God. God understood as relationships. God understood as dynamic. God is understood as sharing identities. And this is our invitation, our challenge. The human person, you and I, each human person, Augustine discovered in this very first page of the very first book of the Confessions, that the human person grows more, matures more, and is sanctified more to the extent that he or she enters into relationships. That is, to the extent that you and I are restless. We go out of ourselves. We're not isolated. We don't shut the doors. We don't turn our back. Augustine realized when we are restless, we're searching, and we search together. We go out of ourselves, and in that we grow. We go out of ourselves to live in communion with God. This relationship which I'm encouraging you to develop during this time when we reflect together on Augustine's Confessions. We develop a communion with God, a communion with others. No other path to God except through others. Augustine stood that he was above all a person of community. He realized that in relationships we discover God. The more we relate, the more fully, truly human we are. And the more we share, the more truly like Christ we are. So the challenge to relate to God, relate to others, relate to ourselves, to know who we are before God, to understand our common vocation, to become more, to share more, to be more like Christ. And that involves also our relationship with nature. So it's knowing myself in order to be better able to know others, to know God, and to understand better what is my place within the work of creation, one among others in this beautiful world which God has given us. So this very first paragraph in which Augustine reminds us that we will always be on a journey, on our journey together, when we relate more to one another and we relate directly to God, when we recognize God present in nature itself, well, we're more likely to be more fulfilled, more holy, more whole. As the first paragraph starts with that beautiful prayer of Augustine, so too the final paragraph of this initial book, merely 20 pages long, is a prayer of thanksgiving. And this entire work of Augustine, the Confession, is absolutely flowing over with spontaneous prayer, which flows from his heart when he realizes, this restless heart, how God has been looking after him from the very first moment of existence, from before he became part of this world. He was in God's heart, as you and I are in God's heart. And so, as I say, the last paragraph, the last phrases of this book one are an invitation to give thanks to God for God's providence, God's care, God's concern. We'll be able to recognize that through those who have looked after us, through nature, through creation, through our friends, through our teachers, how God has providently looked after us. And so, just to read slowly with you these final words of that first book, Praising and Thanksgiving to God. Augustine says he wrote this so long ago, but the words, the sentiments, carry such great meaning for us today. He says, in a living creature such as this, everything is wonderful and worthy of praise. But all these things are gifts from my God. I did not endow myself with them, but they are good, and together they make me what I am. He who made me is good, and he is my good too. Rejoicing, I thank him for all those good gifts which made me what I was, even as a boy. In this lay my sin, that not in him was I seeking pleasures, distinctions, and truth, but in myself and the rest of his creatures. And so I fell headlong into pains, confusions, errors. But I give thanks to you, my sweetness, my honor, my confidence, to you, my God. I give thanks for your gifts. Do you preserve them for me, so will you preserve me too. And what you have given me will grow and reach perfection, and I will be with you, because this too is your gift to me, that I exist. So hopefully we can share those sentiments of Augustine and see how in these 20 pages of the first book, from infancy, when he recognized in the care and concern of his parents, loving parents for him, when as he sucked his mother's milk, recognizing God's providence, God reaching out to him, God looking after him, and recognizing also in these words of praise the gratitude which comes from someone who recognizes that all is gift, that we are stewards of the many good gifts that God has given all of creation, the gift that we are, the gifts that we have, the gifts that are around us, nature itself, how it nurtures and cares for us, and we are stewards to care for, to administer, not to plunder and despoil. Stewards who care enough to be able to conserve, to use sparsely, austerely, so that others too, in future generations and in other parts of the world at this time, can enjoy these many gifts and benefits of which we all are stewards. So even in his reflection on his own infancy, not yet a boy, an infant, he's able to recognize the goodness of God, and our challenge, our invitation to be stewards of God's good gifts. So our hearts are restless, that is true. And we are called to recognize God, each human being. The more we relate, the more like God we are, the more fully human we are. So I encourage you to take up this first book, meditate, read a paragraph, or read all 20 pages, but think of how it applies to you. Journey with Augustine, his journey back to God, which leads him to appreciate God in nature, God in others, God in himself. To be able to do that yourself and to share it, as Augustine did and does. Share your journey with those around you. Share the journey with your friends. Share your journey with God who loves you.